that fear is a non-born mechanism we have from our prehistory as a result of our evolution as humankind, which is very important for our survival. But in some cases, fear can also cause damages. And the reason is simple. This kind of mechanism, according to different anthropologists, has to do with our past life. So when you can imagine that during prehistory, we were used to be very fragile creatures compared to other animals who are stronger, quicker, etc. So obviously, as you can imagine, in a place like Africa, where probably humankind was the first community of humans were there, if I listen to a noise behind the bush, I did not organize a meeting to decide whether a tiger was behind the bush or not. I simply ran. And I didn't want to make a meeting or deciding whether this is a tiger or a lion. No, I simply ran because obviously my only purpose was saving my life. Then later, once I considered that I was safer, then I said, well, was it true, was not true? What do I have to do? But this was something I can only do on a rational basis once the danger is over. When I perceive a danger, basically one part of our brain, which is the left amygdala, so to say, sequestrates our cortex, and we make very rough decision on the base of this instinct, which used to be right. Nowadays, obviously, fortunately, we don't have tigers behind bushes. I mean, maybe you may have in India, definitely not in Europe. As you can imagine, this kind of mechanism sometimes fires, I would say, unnecessarily. Such mechanism has been studied, and in my experience, both as a coach and as a former CEO, I have observed the tendency of discounting the future. What is meant by that? This kind of a word is not mine. That's something the former Nobel Prize Daniel Kahneman used to, so to say, deliver to the general public, which basically means that if I project devastating consequences in the future, my action today will be strongly biased, and I might change completely my decision. So if I fear that the consequences of one word or one decision, mine or somebody else's decision, can be catastrophic, or I perceive as catastrophic, then I will act in a way which can be not only against my interest in the end of the day, if you see with the benefit of the hindsight, or also for an organization, and that's the point. It can really be detrimental for an organization. And the author, Amy Edmondson, shows various examples of how fear can fire. And obviously, the most blatant, which I have also seen, for example, in a large consulting organization, and then I found a parallelism with the book of Amy Edmondson. I remember I was working for a large consulting organization during my early year of career, and I recall the partners were intimidating. That's a word I would say, meaning that nobody dared to speak up, simply for the fear of contradicting, or simply, I don't want to be in trouble with the partner. So basically, the kind of mode most people adopted was obviously survival mode, or some people even left the company if they could and found a new job. So, and I recall I read 2 or 3 years ago a book of Liz Wiseman about multipliers, and basically this kind of fear in organization causes that basically people simply abstain from contributing to the good of the company for the fear of doing something for which they can be punished. This is really the extreme case, right? And then instead of multipliers, I mean, Liz Wiseman called them minimizer. So they simply do not contribute, or even they do things which are even counterproductive for the good of the organization, because they won't simply survive. So if we can see here a parallelism with the old times when, well, I'm afraid of being eaten by a tiger, then I start running, as opposed to thinking about, oh yeah, there are many options. And maybe this fear, the object of this fear is not true, or how we can overcome the situation. So this is a case I found many times in my career, right? Very important thing. Amy Edmondson talks about psychological safety. Psychological safety is not an injection we take in order to quash fear. No, fear is always there. The question is how we handle that, and how we make sure that the organization and the individuals work properly without being sequestrated by fears, which can be fears, as I said, caused by leaders directly, or simply because there are fears because leadership does not act properly. And we will see what is fear and what is not, and what is also psychological safety. But in the case of one important thing is that how an organization, and particularly their leaderships, handle errors. And in the book, it's very interesting to observe different cases. But one of them, and this was a really very interesting research Amy Edmondson did in the medical industry, or better said, in hospitals. And she found out, and she was really surprised in the very beginning, that at hospitals where medical errors are reported as opposed to not reported, more medical errors actually come to surface. And she was surprised, because she thought, well, if people talks about errors, there will be less errors. Actually, this is exactly the opposite. So the opposite is true. And what happens is that when people are free to talk, errors come at surface, but that's exactly how an organization can improve. So it's fundamental that leadership emphasizes that errors are not to be stigmatized, and on the contrary, and conversely, errors have to be spoken, talked, reported, discussed, and that's fundamental. But not only that, the point is that in order to create psychological safety, it's fundamental that punishment is simply put off the table completely, and errors are shared. And I would like to give an example in my professional experience when I used to be a CEO of my own company. I had my own company here, well, not only in Spain, in different countries, and I have a very diverse management board under my tenure. And we made sure with our manager that errors were reported always. Sometimes errors were even really severe errors, sometimes, which caused me, I would say, unpleasant discussion with clients. And that's, believe me, sometimes when I used to have clients such as Microsoft, and as you can imagine, these companies are not nice when they do not feel served properly. But still, I understood that a harsh intervention against those who may have caused the error, in the end, would have produced devastating consequences. Because in the end, sure, I understood that it was also about discussing with the client how we could amend an error and how we could improve the situation. But in the end, it was much better using the error as an opportunity to learn instead of stigmatizing the perpetrator of the error. And we came to a point that in the end, we understand, well, we are human, and instead of punishing not only disciplinary, but also with shame or with public shame or whatever, we said, well, let's talk about this error and what we can do together and what each of us can help the other not to commit this error. So we made also this as an opportunity, and speak up was normal. So I understood that in that case, psychological safety was beneficial. And in the end, in the long run, I found out that basically our organization was a very good learning organization. And in the long run, errors decreased and quality increased. It's very important, and that's something I also would like to emphasize, that psychological safety is not equivalent to immunity and lack of accountability. So, meaning that, sure, I'm not going to punish publicly. I'm not going to get anybody shaming for the error, but it's very important that everybody understands what happened, right? And that we are accountable. That's very important. I think this has to do with the consequences, which is basically what I told in the very beginning. If I'm feared about the consequences, then I'm very likely abstaining from speaking up. But accountability is something different. Another important point, which I understood and in line with what I said, is that basically it's not only about punishing, but it's about really creating psychological safety as a deliberate act of leadership. So, and I found out an interesting parallel with the book of Amy Edmondson when she talked about the case of Toyota. Well, in the old times, particularly in the United States, the big car manufacturers, particularly Ford, Chrysler, etc., they used to produce really big bulk and big chunk of cars, until they found out that after they produced 1 million cars, there were errors, which caused them basically to recall many cars, and this obviously caused many high costs and also a high reputational damage. Toyota found out that it's much better to detect the error in the early stage by producing small batches of cars, and it's much better to report the error as soon as you can, because if you find the errors sooner, obviously you will be able to avoid terrible costs when you recall cars, and also you will be able to contain strongly the reputational damage such error may cause in your customers. Well, this kind of experience is an experience I lived myself, and indeed, a couple of months ago, I used to coach a company based out of Estonia, and this company, which is it's a software company involved in the electronic identity, well, it was very interesting because in the beginning their mandate, well, teach us how to sell, right? And yeah, so what do you want? Yeah, we don't know, we are not very good in selling. Okay, so we start working with the sales team, and in the very beginning, obviously say, well, what do you want to know? Well, explain us. So I started with a typical classical sales class, but in the end, we found out that that's not what they needed. What they needed basically was going through their opportunities in their CRM, talk about them, each of them explaining how you have found the opportunity, how you found the customer, what kind of conversation you had, what kind of problem you had, etc., as opposed to teach a formal sales class. Why that? Because such experiential approach, where everybody also candidly admitted errors, was beneficial. And the CEO, and I really appreciated the CEO of the company, because the CEO of the company was exactly the opposite of punish. He said, well, the more we learn from our errors, the better everybody is going to be. So actually, we were thanking everybody having the courage, but I would say in this case, the honesty more than the courage, to talk about things which are not working properly. And so basically, instead of me keeping my error and maybe somebody else is going to reiterate the error in other circumstances, error was, so to say, socialized, thought about, and basically everybody became responsible. So accountability was there. So nobody said, well, I didn't do that. No, I did what I did. But at least the error became an opportunity for everybody's learning. And it was a very brilliant experience I made there with this company in Estonia. Another aspect I found out in the book is the relationship between psychological safety and high standard. Because one I would say argument, well, you know, I mean, if you become too lax and you let people basically venting their errors, is that basically the risk is that standards will be lower. So basically, in other words, they fear, sometimes organization, that there is a sort of tolerance to complacency, or to complacent behaviors about lower standards. But what I found out, and then there is also an example in the book of Amy Edmondson, is exactly the opposite. So you can raise your standard by having psychological safety so that teams perform better because they know exactly what needs to be done instead of keeping everything for themselves. So in the extreme case, and that was in the book of Amy Edmondson, there was the case of Volkswagen. I don't know whether you recall the scandal Volkswagen had when they installed fraudulent emission devices in order to pass the car tests. Well, the scandal was, beside the scandal, then the reason was that the former CEO of Volkswagen, which was a German guy called Winterkorn, this guy had a style when he said, well, make sure you don't make mistake or else. And then there was the famous else ... So this climate of fear, what caused this climate? Because he thought that by imposing people the idea of you belong to the best company on the planet and you have to be the best, he thought then people would act consequently, and that he thought that even fear was a nice mechanism and the right mechanism to achieve highest quality. The result was that engineers basically found actually a way, well, since basically he's asking me basically not to, if I mess up, if I do anything bad, I'm gonna be punished. I'm gonna create a mechanism so that basically we are gonna pass all tests. And that's how basically Volkswagen, let's use the word, cheated the markets by installing fraudulent emission mechanism. And then there was the whole story with the scandal, and then obviously Volkswagen was caught. They had to pay a lot of money. They obviously faced a lot of lawsuits, etc. But this was the effect. So the effect that were devastating. But what is important is how all this happened, and all this happened because of the fallacy that fear is good to avoid complacency and low standards. And actually, it's exactly the opposite. There's another thing which I found out was important, and I'm about to conclude very soon. Psychological safety is not equivalent to being nice, right? Actually, psychological safety requires honesty. So to speak exactly how things you believe they think are. Now, psychological safety is not something which eliminates business uncertainty or job uncertainty, but it definitely contributes to cope with the uncertainty with courage and wisdom. That's something which is very important and something which I have found out also in my experience being a CEO in a company. The last aspect I would like to emphasize is which has to do with the current times, is the relationship between psychological safety and inner fears. We have been talking sometimes about fears, so to say, really caused by the leaders, but sometimes there are also inner fears, as we mentioned. So inner fears, particularly in this time, I have found out in my work as coach, and I've seen one important thing. Because the current pandemic caused basically many authorities to decide lockdowns, right? And one experience I found out here in Spain is that Spain, for example, in the very beginning was didn't want to talk the talk and simply, well, they were really hesitant in billing a lockdown. Why that? And the question is, what I found out also in organization is the fact that people do not like to give bad news and to deliver bad news. And that's because of and why? Because people may feel to be, well, I'm fear to be humiliated, or I can feel lonely because I deliver bad news. And that's something organization and also coach have to be very careful when they sense that there is this issue. I have found also when I was coaching, in this case, individuals, that now many people now work at home, from home, as opposed to the time before the pandemics, which is good. But people also, I found out they feel more lonely compared to the time when they used to go to the office every day. And the fact of feeling lonely creates in them sometimes fears, which sometimes they not articulate and sometimes also distort their behavior. So what I found out, and that's something we were discussing with a client, it's very important that even if you meet in a virtual space, it's very important that, for example, an organization told me, yeah, what we do, we celebrate sincerity and we thank all those who speak about their errors. So they came to a point that, particularly in these times, it's very important to really getting people to talk what they feel, because if they don't do, the consequences and the fact that they may even abstain to speak up because of their fears will be devastating. And on the top of that, since basically they do not see people every day, they have less contact with them and they even know even less their emotions. So nowadays, it's even more important to create psychological safety. And this was the point of my talk today. Thank you for your gracious time.